tonight's event. But have no fear, only those of us who are unmuted and appearing in the yellow box will be stuck there on YouTube forever. Also, if you have any questions at any point, we'll have a little Q&A at the end. Please feel free to type them at any point during the chat. Rachel and I will save them up. It reminds me, I'm Davith Wood. I am the events manager for Northshire's Manchester, Vermont location. And I'm here as always with my good friend, Rachel Person from Northshire's Saratoga Springs location. We're just about to start things off. And Rachel is just about to introduce everyone. But the last thing I'd like to think is just a real note of thanks. It's been a rough year for independent bookstores and local independent businesses of all kinds. So we couldn't be here without you, and we appreciate your support. So thanks so much. All right, Rachel, take things away, please.
So Davith and I are really excited about tonight's reading, and we're hosting it tonight in celebration of the recent publication of Jules Gibbs' new poetry collection, Snakes and Babies. Her previous collection is entitled Bliss Crisis, and she teaches at Syracuse University. She's joined here tonight by poet and photographer Rachel Eliza Griffiths as part of her second appearance in Northshire Live. We are fortunate to host Rachel Eliza this past fall for a remarkable reading of poems from her collection, Seeing the Body. Rachel Eliza is actually also going to be one of the authors participating in the inaugural Saratoga Book Festival, which is coming up on October 16th. And you can visit saratogabookfestival.org to learn more and sign up for their email list. Thank you, Jules and Rachel Eliza, for being with us tonight. And everyone, please join me in welcoming them to Northshire Live.
Do we?
Yeah, you can take it away.
Thank you so much, Rachel. I think sometimes with Zoom, we're still kind of like, who speaks now? Jules, do you want to begin, or shall I begin, or shall we begin?
We begin. Well, do you want to read first, or do you want to talk first?
Let's talk first. Let's.
Okay.
So Jules and I, we were speaking and preparing, and so excited to read together. I hope you will go out immediately if you don't already have it and get her Fierce debut, her collection, second collection, Snakes and Babies. I have to be the poet who plugs and praises because I love this woman so much. But when we were chatting, we thought that we would maybe talk about our collections. We're both having collections come out during a pandemic, but we are in sisterhood and kinship thematically and stylistically and subject matter. And so we felt that we might talk a little bit about our collections and then ease you into each of us reading some poems. And then that way we could generate questions and a conversation to continue. We have some questions for each other, but we would really love your questions. And so Jules, would you like to start and tell us about your new book? And then I could say a few things about mine, but then we could just merge and talk.
Sure. So yeah, this new collection is a long time coming. It took me many years to write. And I don't know why that is. I guess I'm just a very slow writer. But it seems like it's not that all of this was intentional or I set out to write a book in this way. But now that I reflect on it, and when I was thinking about this reading, and I was thinking about Rachel Eliza's book, Seeing the Body, which I have right here, beautiful book with her beautiful photographs and poetry together in it. And I was thinking about the relationship to my own book. I mean, they're two, right, Rachel, they're two very different books. And yet I think that what is similar between them is really a very feminist stance in both of the books and in the poetics. So in Rachel Eliza's intro to her book, she talks about this negotiation with woman as ghost, woman as body, woman as geography, woman as imagination, woman as a self and as a resistance, woman ever tense, in the progression of frames, woman in the perpetuity of language, and woman in the sanctity of intuition. And I love that as a framing for your poems, Rachel Eliza, but I was also hoping I could maybe borrow some of that as a way to frame my own poems and say, yeah, I hope that at least I aspire to write in that way, and to write with those themes in mind. My book comes more out of dream state, and I know dreams are boring when you tell them to people. Everybody knows the saying, tell a dream, lose a reader. I think that's Henry James said that. But they're heavily mediated dreams by the time they end up in the poems. And so, snakes and babies, those are dream obsessions, but so much of our life happens in the dreaming state. And it's not separate from us, it's of us too. The unconscious mind, as weird as it is also your mind, and it's also you. And so I think that's a lot of what informed this book and where the poems actually come from. Rachel, do you want to say something about yours?
Yeah, that was so beautiful. And I was following a thread of thought about what you were saying about kind of dreams and what we were also speaking about as far as kind of like, in our identities as poets, the distinctions, if there are any, between the rational mind and the mystical mind. I've been thinking of that question you shared with me, and I think that happens in a space of grief, which, but it also happens and is located and lodged in the body. And I think you and I also share profound respect and admiration for the natural world, in nature, and the kind of lawlessness, the mystery, the order and design, and also miracle of the natural world. And so I think all of that pours into our language and imagery and lyricism in both of our collections. And just, to send a love letter to you, I just wanted to read this little thing that says, the snake's infinity, the zeros and ones, were sent by the gods or parents or teachers to destroy or falsify, like a math problem that can only resolve itself in more mystery. And I just really love that. I feel like that's something that I need to read every day, and to think of, the math, but also the mystery, and the lack of resolution, even in death, the lack of resolution of one's life and one's living. And so all of those things I see in your poems and in your beautiful book. And I think they are present in Seeing the Body, which is a hybrid collection of poems and photographs that track my own journey through my mother's death in 2014. And I think of the snake and kind of the shedding of its body and its constant, infinities and zeros, and it's like kind of fluidity actually. And so in Seeing the Body, I am interested in my grief, but also the way that grief is a conduit to a greater understanding about the continuum of life and desire and nature. And so there's also a transformation. I don't think my poems have healed me. I'll always miss my mother, but in the immediacy of the mind and the heart and the body, there's something in trying to grieve, but also celebrate the actual life that one is mourning, including oneself, meaning the woman I was when I was still kind of a literal daughter, although I am a daughter still. It's completely altered now in a different way. And so I think in Seeing the Body, I wanted to explore the real vibrant way of life. And as I'm thinking of like vibrant energy, you know, it just sings from every poem of yours of just this really energy and like force of nature, but force of the mind, in asking really different questions and pushing back on the things that family and teachers and lovers may have told us or given us or not given us, right? So I really feel like that thing of the snake, and I think I actually have maybe snakes. I have a lot of animals in Seeing the Body as well,
Mhm.
but I see a lot of overlap in the same space, that there are real differences, you know, in the books, but at the same time, like we're coming together in this way. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm completely rambling because
You're not
I just
rambling.
love talking to you. But you know, I think that's what I could say about Seeing the Body. And um, you know, one last thing would be the photographs as being these kind of physical artifacts, in the way that you might walk through the woods and find the skull of a bird or a broken eggshell of something that was born. The photographs for me function in a way of me having a desire to try to look at my physical body in the space of my mother's death, and try to still hold on to my mother in the body that she made and gave me through her own body. So
Mhm.
those are some things I would say about Seeing the Body.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a beautiful book, and it's a beautiful, I mean, it's such a meditation. I don't know any other book that does that, that meditates on the loss of a mother to the extent that you do in this book. It attends so faithfully. It's really a beautiful tribute to her.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And should we read? I'd love to hear you read. Um, I can read a few poems, and then, as I told you, get out of the way so we can hear your poems, and then we can.
Don't get out of the way. Stay right in my way at all times.
I also just want to say, because the intimacy of Zoom, I think if there can be intimacy in it, and I believe there can be, I just also want to say thank you. I see so many familiar names in communities that we share, and I just want to acknowledge that and say thank you to all of you who, you know, on a glorious spring Tuesday, you're gathering here to celebrate Jules and her beautiful book. And I just want to say thank you. Thank you. I'm full of thanks right now. So thank you. And I hope you'll have some questions for us to talk about, all of us, really. I think Jules and I agree that the more interactive we are, the more exciting and fulfilling, I use air quotes, that Zoom can be.
Yeah.
For us.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Definitely. Yeah.
okay. So shall I read and then?
Please. Yeah.
Okay. So I think I've set up a bit of what the subject is of Seeing the Body. I'll read a few poems, and when there are things I feel that would be really inherent to know, so that you can access the poem or what I'm hoping to say or convey, I'll be sure to tell you those things. This poem is called Hunger. Weeks after her death, I came to the garden window to marvel at sudden pale feathers catching, scattering past the rainy glass. I looked for magic everywhere, signs from the afterlife that I was indeed distinct. Beneath the talon of a red-tailed hawk, a pigeon moved briefly until it didn't. The hawk stripped the common bird, piercing its thick neck, beak probing body, until I could see the blood from where I stood inside. This could happen naturally enough, even in Brooklyn. This could happen whether or not my mother was dead. I didn't eat for weeks because it felt wrong to want bread and milk. The hawk's face turning red, beautiful as it plucked and picked its silver white prey apart. It wasn't magic, but hungrily I watched, as if I didn't know memory could devour corpses caught alive in midair. I opened the window, knelt on the fire escape. I was the prey and hawk. This was finally myself swallowing those small, common parts of me, tearing all of that away into strips, my breast open to the bone. I saw myself torn apart, tearing and tearing at the beautiful face, the throat beneath my claw, my grieving face red with being exactly what I knew myself to be. It's a kind of, I don't know, miracle every time I do come across kind of these hawks when they're eating and feeding. And not too long ago in Manhattan, in the middle of Manhattan, I looked out of my window and saw this kind of scene again, and the kind of recurrence of that and what I associate with it now. This poem is called Comedy. I am here before the nurse brings my mother breakfast. I study her body, try to remember if I caught my mother in the dream I had the night before, where the hem of her gown flew through a silver tunnel without end. Her skin went right through my hands whenever I was close enough to save her. She slipped through her name I could not stop calling until I sat up alone in my crib. Embarrassed, she tells me she remembers how she phoned me last night to let me know she was in the morgue. She laughs as the nurse, whose feet squeak in Minnie Mouse Crocs, arrives with tea. We watch the nurse with eyes that will never remember her. Thank her for the toast that is thicker than my mother's hand. That morphine is some powerful shit, my mother says. I agree with her, as though she has merely mentioned it is cold outside, though I have rarely had morphine and have never made courtesy calls from a morgue. It was late, and I didn't know where I was, she says, because that wasn't death, which means I couldn't have called you from that place. This is my new mother, who has finally admitted fear into the raw ward of her heart. This is my mother who flew away from my grasp in the tunnel without end. The woman who could not wait for me to grab the white edge of where she was going. I was afraid, she says. Looking over the rim of her plastic cup, she shakes the world. Chipped ice between us. Yeah, don't go and write about me like that, she says. I already know you will. So the next poem I'd like to read, as I'm flipping for the page number, which I have written down, is it's called Elegy Surrounded by Seven Trees, and it focuses on kind of in the cemetery where my mother is buried. This is the kind of thing that a poet would do, is kind of see the company of trees around the place where my mother is resting. And so this poem is kind of an elegy to landscape, which is so critical and inherent to the way that I come through the lyric and come in and through a poem. This is called Elegy Surrounded by Seven Trees, All Saints Cemetery, Wilmington, Delaware. Ordinary days deliver joy easily again, and I can't take it. If I could tell you how her eyes laughed, or describe the rage of her suffering, I must admit that lately my memories are sometimes like a color warping in my blue mind. Metal abandoned in rain. My mother will not move, which is to say that sometimes the true color of her casket jumps from my head like something burnt down in the genesis of a struck flame, which is to say that I miss the mind I had when I had my mother. I own what is yet, which means I am already holding my own absence and faith. I still carry a faded slip of paper where she once wrote a word with a pencil and crossed it out. From tree to tree, around her grave, I have walked and turned back, if only to remind myself that there are some kinds of peace which will not be moved. How awful to have such wonder. The final way, wonder itself opened beneath my mother's face at the last moment, as if she was a small girl kneeling in a puddle and looking at her face for the first time, her fingers gripping the loud, wet rim of the universe. Here's a poem, a very short poem I'm going to read called Good Deeds. And I want to thank Naomi Shihab Nye, who selected this poem and featured it in the New York Times when she was editing. She has this poem called Kindness that if you can find it on the internet, and it's just a remarkable poem, and I keep it near me because there's such a generosity about suffering, but also about joy in the poem. That is something I'm always thinking about. And I think, as I'm thinking about this book and the kind of grief in it, and back last June, the way that our world was and still is in many ways, and thinking about the profound process, if we allow ourselves to have it, individually, but also nationally and globally, about the grief of what we're seeing of, bodies being burned without ritual, and, funerals and tributes happening through Facebook Live, or, socially distant funerals, or not being able to really pay the respect and have the space in one's life and kind of bandwidth to really, I don't even want to say the word process, but to kind of internalize and metastasize the grief and trauma that we're living through. I feel that poetry is one of the ways that can help, but there are so many parts of something that is so complicated and nuanced and so private and intimate, and yet like connective at once. Anyway, this is called Good Deeds. Then think of every song of love hurled at you and yours. Recall how battered you were by sheer understanding so that you might surrender. Not her being gone, but everything else. The world insists you return. You go along with the house rules, what the passage of sunlight means, a warmth that is bold enough to burn the world alive. I say, I can't remember how to be the same. I say, I can't pretend to be that woman, the world, or the love song you left behind your eyes. I say that I am beginning to understand the way my friends sing alone inside of walls. And I've timed this. I think I have time for one more. Yeah, or two more. Let's see. Oh, the Zoom quiet is so intense. I think.
2 more.
2 more. Thank you so much for rescuing me from that. Okay, so this is the title poem called Seeing the Body. And one of the things that I'm interested in hearing from Jules is kind of the process and the kind of way that the architecture got studied into the language of how the reader, but also the poet is kind of working through the poems and then coming into some kind of order or sensibility that kind of gives the greatest, fullest bodied voice to the poems. So that is something I'm bookmarking for us to talk about. Seeing the Body is the title poem for my book, and yet it was probably one of the last poems I wrote because it really scared me, and it wasn't a way that I had written before, but which also taught me that I was going to have to live in a way I never lived before after my mother died. So what I need to tell you is that after I say the word I, there's a poet's favorite, there's an M dash, and so you'll hear me pause, just so you think that your Zoom isn't going out if you hear the kind of a pause. But I want to think about the way on the page how to show the rupture of breath and the kind of holding and letting go of breath in the face of grief. Seeing the body. She died, and in the spring of her blood, I remember my mother's first injury. Surprise of unborn petals curling red, then dark around her wrist. Some fruit she cut, some onion, some body with skin and sharp seeds. She fed me. She lived us and I. She held we and I. She kept speaking with those flowers falling from her blood, taking her across the sky to death. I remember her voice like a horn I never want to pull out of my heart. In the next life, which is here and here, I gather every mouth that ever sang my mother's blues. She burned and she talked back hard at God. Oh, my mother, she danced unbroken too. Veil of grief on my back I wear. Veil of grief on my back, opening into something black I wear. A life of flesh, like a petal or fruit or burning. I've carried everything, and I'm tired. My mother survived and but she did not live. She told me nothing and she was waiting the entire time. How does the elegy believe me? Together we crossed the sky. There was a gate and we walked through the world like that. She wrote we and I. She was last or never seen and brown eyes without life opened her eternity when the air in her stopped and she was last seen dying. She was too silent for the first time in her life. The spring of my mother's blood, hot in God, the dark, dark beyond the closed door that won't move again. And then to lift us up, as you know, the song that comes on when the party's about to be over and we have to throw ourselves around in joy. And you know, on a day or two following Mother's Day, I'd like to read this poem, Good Mother, to you and to say thank you. And I'm so really, I'm delighted and joyful and joyous to read with my sister Jules and to celebrate her gorgeous book, which I hope you already have near you or you're ordering. This poem is called Good Mother, and I'd like to thank Paisley Rechtel, who chose this poem for Best American Poetry 2020. I just think it's important to say thank you when people see you and support you. Good mother. Praise the woman who took me in her arms and wouldn't let go of me. We sank to the floor in the middle of the aisle in Rite Aid. It was a late morning, and I walked slowly, furious that spring could still be so wonderful. Magnolia tempted me to forget about my mother for a few minutes. I stared at a Brooklyn blue sky through branches clasping pear blossoms. The limbs shook in sunlight. My eyes adjusted when I went into the pharmacy and realized everywhere I looked, the world announced it would soon be Mother's Day. Something ripped itself out of me, a howl so wide I thought I would burst. The woman near the counter understood right away, the way my mother once understood I have been born in a specific sadness. The woman did not say she was a mother, but I knew it. She put her arms around me and waved away the cashiers, the security guard who repeated, "Ma'am, ma'am." A stranger rocked me in her arms, so much kindness as we fell over and crashed against a row of votive candles. She didn't say it would be okay. She didn't ask me what was wrong, but her arms put me in a vicious prayer. I almost bit her, almost pushed her away. We held on. We held on and praised the nameless thing that makes us what we think we aren't strong enough to know. She knew. She didn't let go of me. Praise the woman who didn't wipe my snot from her shirt, my tears from her collarbone, who did not tell me to pull myself together while everything inside me dropped. Crushed bones, blossoms pushing through my mouth. A word, mom, mom, mom. This broken bird song of mine, with no bird, no wing, no way to fly back through time. Praise the woman who did not leave me like something suddenly dead on a sidewalk with a breeze blowing over its face. Praise the woman who smelled like fabric softener and coffee and the good things I must believe I am too. Praise the mothers who walk slowly through the world, bringing children into themselves, burying children sometimes before themselves, and who defend something harder than innocence. Praise the guts and grace of mothers. Praise their exhaustion and their good work. Praise their wit, their wonderful ways of listening to the world fall asleep against its clean pillow. For the woman who knelt with me in an ugly heap in the middle of Rite Aid on an unbearable spring day, who helped me buy a Mother's Day card for my dead mother, who knew better than to say I'd be just fine. For you, I lift my arms each spring and wish you a kindness so fantastic I sometimes feel I'm in midair, the shadow of my wings, clapping in joy above your children who must love you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rachel Eliza. That was beautiful. I'm in trouble now, though, with my own mother who's here because I don't have any mother poems. She's going to say, why don't you write poems about me the way Rachel Eliza? Sorry, Mom. Next book, next book. There are so many people here who I know and love, including many former and current students. And I see you all. And I'm so happy to see all of your faces. Thanks for being here. And thank you, Rachel Eliza, for reading with me. This is a great joy to read with you. You know, Rachel Eliza has just been so important to me and to, you know, it's hard to be a writer and it's hard to be a poet, and it's a lonely endeavor. And if you can have one person who, as she said, sees you and supports you, that can be the difference between continuing on or not. And Rachel Eliza, you've been that to me, and I thank you for that. Okay, I'm going to read about 6 poems. And this first one is called Bind. And it comes from a Zen koan that you probably have heard. If you meet the Buddha in the street, in the road, kill him. Another note on it, Mao Zedong did write poetry, quite a lot of poetry, including sonnets. And I think those are all the notes you need for this one. Bind. If you meet the Buddha in the street, melt him down, cast bullets. That's what Mao did, cast him into densest form. You only think you want emptiness because you are already 99.9996% empty. By existing, you are in tune with the empty pulse of the empty universe. It's not necessary to connect with what you mean, the elusive reply you think your shrink's waiting for. You'll never please her. Talking is as pointless as chanting, which is as pointless as silence. Dear child, the resonant space that holds us together and pulls us apart is what we are. Blessings and the obstruction to blessings. This next poem, all the books in my, poems in my book have one-word titles, which was a weird decision I made sort of at the end, but they all had different titles to begin with. I think I just kind of got tired of titles overtaking things, and I just wanted to quiet them down. And so they all have one-word titles, as if to almost flatten them out, as if they're almost non-existent, really. So this one's called Crash, but it was originally called A Poem with Nothing in It, which is a lot more informative when you read it. And it comes from sort of the same idea as when everybody's so familiar with yoga now. At the end of yoga, when you go into corpse pose, Shavasana, and if you have a really great person guiding you into Shavasana, you can really let go of almost anything. You're almost dead. It's great because you don't die, but you're almost dead, and you can let go of everything. And the woman at the yoga studio that unfortunately closed permanently because of the pandemic was so amazing. And she would lead you into it, and she would say, there's nowhere to go, there's nothing to do, and there's nothing to be. And I loved this idea of just not having to even be anything. And because when you really let go of everything and you really sort of surrendered to corpse pose, when you wake back up, when you come back to the world, it sort of rushes back in and you feel super revived by that. And also, I think there's a lot of saying no and being anti and negating in my book. And I think I've only just noticed that now that I've started doing readings. And I think that's a way to sort of push against the things that harm and oppress us, as a way to make more space for your own spirit. Crash. No sun with teeth, no teeth or tongues on days you need, nothing to do or be. I'm giving you this poem with nothing in it in case you want the relief of the nothing it will give. It works like a woman to give you that, to not give you that. There's music and some other noise, but that's not anything. Maybe some crows hanging around with their rasps, stentorian. The hum of government is just the space where something used to be. Inbox empty. In the den, no fox. Matter unsexed. Your body talks of pain, but it's phantom. Nothing in the cracks on your molars but the suchness of a future. Let's not go so far as dead, since that may still feel like something. Nothing in the synapse but leaps. No beginning in the Big Bang. Nothing in cells but how you spark around your body, lighting up your insides at all hours like a sun with teeth, which is not a thing, and therefore you're beginning to think this might actually be something. But the poem with nothing in it has to seem like it's giving if it's going to deliver on the nothing you need. I'm giving you this poem with nothing in it, like a tear in the fabric. No sun with lips or arms to turn you into a blue narcissus. No baby teeth disappeared from under the pillow. No birds of death. No new forms of surrender, terrors stirred, not dreams where clumps of hair and teeth come loose in your hands, not the viper pit or coronal hole. No one really knows into which category a dream falls, or if it's right to say the poem with the hailstorm really has a hailstorm in it. Crash, yes. You might be looking at your hands now, thinking how empirical they seem, how they hold all the thunder of your mothers. The next poem is, it's a roadkill poem. But it's also about sort of the solipsism of a poet, the way that poets are so self-absorbed that in everything they can see themselves in their own suffering sometimes, to the point where it can get really silly. But really it's a roadkill poem, and it's about driving in America too. And it's also about poetry. If I could have given it an epigraph, or if I wanted to now, it would be from this. The philosopher Derrida was asked in an Italian journal, what's a poem? What did he think a poem was? And he responded that a poem is sort of like, I'll tell you when it's the quote part, a hedgehog thrown out in the middle of the road, quote, rolled up in a ball, prickly with spines, vulnerable and dangerous, calculating and ill-adapted because it makes itself into a ball, sensing the danger on the highway and exposes itself to an accident. No poem without accident, says Derrida. No poem that does not open itself like a wound, but no poem that is not also just as wounding. Drive. You know you're a poet if driving a car in America threatens your dialectical reversals, the radical autonomy of the highway like a corpse who lays down and dies a second time just for you. The asphalt is classless and hierarchical, an expanse of carcasses, whitetails and possums, lost dogs and turtles, all without an eye for you. Every way opens, an anti-Marxist utopia, densest forests part, rivers plunge underground, tires unpeel dioxins in atmospheres. You don't deserve this. You drive like a statue with no head, a cobra with legs, Shiva's devoted Naga who won't cop to his own religion, pursued in the frantic speed of the mind's mind, which is always miles ahead and miles behind. The bumper sticker on the truck says, "How's my dying?" And you see the big poetic crash waiting for you out there, the final horizon on your woundedness. In your fisheye vision, creatures of the forest perform honor suicides with a thwump against your grill. You feel it like a blow to your overgrown cerebral cortex. Even without ideology, the autonomous animals have done things for you, unspeakable things in the name of freedom. Okay, the next poem is called Thin. And it is about the culling, the thinning of the herd, the culling of the deer that happens now in suburban places, but also in cities like Syracuse. Here in Syracuse, we live in the city, and there are tons and tons of deer all over the place. And I guess humans have decided that they can't share the space with the deer. And so they voted to kill them. There are snipers and people with crossbows out in marked areas, but still I've come across this, you know, walking up in a field on campus in the snow, just blood everywhere. I thought there was some ritual murder that had happened. I was terrified. And then somebody said, I think they're calling deer. So yeah, I don't really get it. But anyway, that's what's happening here in Syracuse. And so I wrote this poem. Thin. We oppose you, say the people. Oh, there's one other note that I want to make, actually. In Dakota culture, it's believed that we descend from deer, that deer were our mothers. And also it's true. I mean, we really did, we have evolved for millions and millions of years alongside the deer. Thin. We oppose you, say the people, and vote yes on Proposition Cull. The people's will goes out into the air, and this the deer can smell. They stomp and huff, kick loam, hot mouthfuls of breath taken up in the mist become atmospheric, a new form of governance, a future that hoards and loathes its own predation. Once the deer were our mothers, now they seem cynical, opportunistic, less terrestrial, more like us. How blue the path where you are never alone. In their eyes, a primitive answer you want to unknow. How blue is the green, green world, how it pulls at your lungs. Give up your tongue, the flash of white tail through the thicket. Give up your cud, your fawns, the little fox who trails you sweetly to the stream. Let's retreat into the cave and paint each other, cinematic and firelight, where our long kinship refuses to budge. Civilly, we aim for your heart. Step into our sights where we fail to ID the enemy. Give us the gentlest thing in you that resists. Let's become pure abstraction, taken into the bouquet of history, swirl of spores, leafy post-thunder oils that render us ions of ancestry. Two more poems. And just to say thanks again for listening, and thanks for being here with us. And we're happy to talk to you and answer questions at the end. So feel free to ask us anything about our poems or about poetry. This next poem is called Stay. And it is an Ars Poetica, a poem about the art of poetry. It steals a line, or it steals a phrase from Keats's poem Ode on a Grecian Urn. So where you hear spirit ditties of no tone, that's Keats, that's not me, with apologies to Keats. Stay. To stay all night, to pass the night as in prayer, to fail the way air often fails, to be less light, more key, to strum in the manner of atmospheres, traverse a sawdust forest, a stream to harass the janky spirit, a torrent, to wait another year for salmon to draw their lovely carons over carons, to be erratic, raw in one's desire for what's beyond the rapids, to arouse a sense of static, to cause to never laugh again, to reside in dissonance, Chaucy with root juice and gristle, to be hurt by flawlessness, measures of success, to topple equilibrium, cabbage a little cloth from his coat in revenge, to mouth a dead language at the edge of your city, to speak in the full faith of deadness, to never come to the source, to make yourself prone to small musics, sink your arm in loam, to touch the spirit ditties of no tone. This is the last poem, and it's called Want. It too had another better title, which was Protest Poem. And I wrote it as a protest poem, but kind of a weird take on the protest poem. I'm the poetry editor for the Progressive Magazine, which is an old political magazine. And it's been around since, I think, 1909. And so I read a lot of political poetry, and protest poems come in too. And so this is my take on that. It's a little bit in the same spirit as the poem With Nothing in It that I read at the beginning. It's saying no, sometimes almost indiscriminately, like a angsty teenager who has to hate everything before they can have any real conviction about loving the world. And so it's doing that. If I were to give it epigraphs, here are two I wish I had given it. One is from the Portuguese poet Fernando Pessoa, and he says, "I feel beliefs which I do not hold. I am ravished by passions I repudiate." The other one is from Emily Dickinson in her letters, and I can't even say that I quite understand it, but I'm always thinking about it. No is the wildest word we consign to language. Protest poem. Whatever they want out there in the streets, the answer is no. No to the never forgetting. No to the fat of yes. No to the body's meridian, the tyranny of health, the symmetry of death. Whatever the Pope is calling for, no. No to the shamans divining a higher self. No to machete, corpses unearthed. No bullet, no background check. No chokehold, no freedom. No to the treaty, open hands of the medicine men. No to death birds, to winter and data, human cargo lost at sea. No to the whereabouts unknown list. No to the oil slicks rainbow, arabesques left by shadow dogs pissing in the snow. No to the envelope of sleep, divine intervention, to the sadhu who held his arm overhead for 32 years and now wants to lower it. The arm simply says no. No to Adam and the atom of yes, its storm of no and no and no. We should have known it would end up like this, a pack of slavering mongrels chasing us into the impoverishment of no. Yes, we are practiced at poker faces, shake our heads, no, no, yes, yes. But no to Ahimsa, to Mothlight and Ginsburg, his hipsterish angels who blathered on, grew bitter, old, turned on their own, robbed our sons and daughters of their no. Thank you. Thanks for listening. I know it's always the first person to ask a question is the hardest one, right? But feel free to ask us anything. We're happy to chat with you.
This has been so lovely, both of you. Thank you both so much for your words. It's really been a joy to listen. And I know from a couple of things that I've gotten in messages and seen flow by that the rest of the audience has really been feeling the same. It's just been sensational. We actually don't have any questions so far, and we are close to out of time. So maybe the two of you, you had mentioned that you had some questions for each other. Maybe the two of you would each like to pose a question of the other.
I actually have a question I need to ask Rachel. Well, tell me about your epigraph for your book.
Oh yes, okay, that I can, and it's really cool. So the epigraph of Seeing the Body is from Stevie Wonder's song As. And it's a question in the song. It is, did you know you're loved by somebody? And, you know, I mean, it's this poem, this song of Stevie Wonder's As is it's like a whole movement. I feel like it's a whole Genesis creation story, but it just has all these parts to it that come together and they rise and they fall. And then at one point under one of the kind of overtures, it almost is under the music, he says, "Did you know you're loved by somebody?" And he's almost like laughing it as he's saying it. And my mother adored Stevie Wonder. It was something to like dance around in the house when Stevie came on. And so, rather than, maybe quote another poet or someone really smart, Stevie Wonder is really brilliant. And every time I hear that song, I just I want to be alive. And so
Yeah.
I think it stays open for the reader as well. I think, did you know you're loved by somebody? It's just like kind of brilliant. And the way that musicians can be and poets have to do much more work to
Yeah.
get that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I love that.
So
I mean, and you take it up again in another poem too. There's a poem that
Mhm.
takes up As. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, he's threaded through. In my last book, it was Nina Simone's voice that kind of I kept in Lighting the Shadow. I kept feeling that she was kind of sitting on my shoulders, or really I'm sitting on her shoulders or sitting on one of her toes because she's so magnificent. But it was Stevie Wonder because I grew up on that. And so I think that's the thing, that's the kind of music I had to listen to so I could dive down into the wreck, as Adrienne Rich would say, dive into the wreck with my camera,
Mhm.
climb down the ladder. Um, but no, thank you for asking me about that, Jules. I wanted to ask you, the poems are so, I just feel such a sense of the world. Everything feels so palpable and so closely, you're just attuned to a life like beyond the veil of like what I think most people see something, and that you challenge that thing that is visible, in the way that I feel great and beautiful poets do, and make us look at things a second and third and fourth time, and then make us look at how we look. And
Mhm.
so I wanted to ask you, how did that work for you as you were working on the poems? Did you find yourself coming in and out of that, or did you feel like you were immersed? I mean, there's such a brilliant weaving of like kind of the natural world, but just the body. But then there's also humor. And I want to say, I mean, I can never write funny poems, and so I have a lot of admiration because you have this beautiful humor and sensibility in your poems that just feels like it's like intimate. And I mean, I guess it would sound dorky to say, well, how do you do that? But could you speak to any of those things
I
about the
Yeah,
world?
I don't know. I think the voice that maybe is funny is the voice that's the part of me looking askance at this whole project of poetry, going
Mhm.
like, I don't know, I don't know. You know, you take yourself too seriously,
Mm.
right? And so, and I actually always feel that I'm kind of like my own worst enemy in writing poems, but then I sometimes can turn that to my advantage for the poem, right? So that you have these competing voices and competing sensibilities that are kind of co-constructing the poem,
Mhm.
and and they're kind of critical of each other too, and they're
Mhm.
sometimes at odds. So that's okay. I mean, I actually have gotten more comfortable with that. And also just like my own, I just answered this question for somebody who interviewed me. I think it's like being a little bit more comfortable with, and this takes a lot to trust, being more comfortable with your own idiosyncratic, strange way of seeing the world. Because we're all so, you know, we live in this social matrix that's constructing our identities and our way of seeing things and our way of being. But what if you could just even try to strip some of that away? What
Mhm.
would happen?
Mhm.
Would you see things differently? And then the second part of that is harder. And can you trust the way that you see things when you see it differently?
Mm.
Um, so I kind of make that like my highest mission when I'm approaching the poem. Can I do that? I mostly often fail to do that.
No,
but-
I would disagree with you there.
but like it's maybe, and it's like what I want to do is unattainable, to sound like no one else, right? I mean but there's no such thing. That's not a thing. I live in the world, and I'm part of everyone else and everyone else's voices, in ways that I love and respect too. So yeah, I think it's that tension that leads me to kind of contending with things in maybe a stranger way. And the embodiment, like language is a body. You know this from your own work, like your own work speaks to this. Language is a body. That's what I think is a theme of your book, right? And so how does the body speak? And yeah, I think that's the best I can say about how I approach it.
Gorgeous thank you and farewell to everyone. And I thank you, how does a body speak? That we could all take that question, and it would take us our lifetimes to not even try to answer it, but to do justice by such a beautiful and profound question. So thank you, Jules, for inviting me to join you and celebrate
Eliza, so
your
much.
gorgeous book. And thank you to all of our friends and just loved ones who love us and love you and love this book and are going to spread the word. And yeah, this is wonderful. Thank you so much, Northshire Books and Dafydd and Rachel and everyone in Saratoga and Vermont. Thank you to everyone for making space for us to speak about our work.
Well, thank you both. This has been a wonderful evening and a wonderful space that you've created. Thank you both so much.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Babies, order it from Northshire. Thank you, Jules, and congratulations on this beautiful book.
Thank you so much, guys.
So have a good evening.
Thank you, everyone, and good night.
Good
Good night.